Second hour, final hour, best hour here on 104.5 The Zone, as we've got 59 minutes until 3HL comes on here on 104.5 The Zone, as he is the hitman Blaine Bishop. I'm Joe Hunk, brought to you by All Four Seasons Garage Doors. And we are joined in studio now by a familiar name that you may know. He's the former general manager of the Atlanta Falcons. That is Thomas Dimitroff, as he is now working with Sumer Sports, as is Sean Clement, who is here. And you guys
working with what
is this relationship?
Well, there's a lot going on here. Look, first of all, I'm happy to be here in one of the coolest cities in the country, right?
Yeah,
I come in with mohawks. I come in with cool stuff. Bars right around the area.
Yeah.
Yes. You're one to talk about hair.
Studio, man, so we make sure we're right here. What happened?
I said he's one to talk about hair.
Right.
Like, literally,
Exactly.
You've had like the coolest hair in the NFL for like 15 years.
If I did what you did, I could pull it off, I think. I'll just put a little bit of this and that.
But see, I can't do that. That's the reason why I did this, is I'd love that style. I just can't do it. And now you guys are here for, was the NCAA Symposium? What is this exactly?
Football recruiting symposium.
This is Sean Clement. Yes. He's the right-hand man. Analytics, kind of explain what you do.
Yeah, the nerd half of our football operations here on analytics.
Gotta have it.
Just trying to blend a little bit of objectivity in with the subjective here.
And a West Point guy who flew Blackhawks, like I was saying. This guy's a military guy. He's got a great mind. We're excited about having him.
Yeah, I hear we both have the same kind of neck.
You have the same. You did yours by hitting people in football games.
Well, in Atlanta, by the way, when I knocked myself out in the fourth quarter there and messed up my neck, there you had neck surgery, up in the helicopters and everything.
That's how I ended up in football analytics. That's a long story. I know we don't have time for it, but yeah, it's
we have an hour.
It's just had to make a career change. Let's just say, and so that's how I got into football analytics.
Yeah, we both did. See, so we both
Yes,
kind of pivoted and went in a different direction.
Yes, sir.
So how does this work? Like, exactly, because you guys are here and there's like a program that you both have created that is trying to help football teams. Like, how long is this program who created the program, first off? Like, what's the team like?
So we started about 3 years ago. A guy named Paul Tudor Jones, famous macro trader, really, really strong in the industry, was interested in creating a football data analytics company. He was handshake away with Wayne Huizenga to buy the Dolphins. Very fascinated football man in the business world. We started this 3 years ago with 3 of us. We are now at 40 data scientists and engineers strong. We've also, most recently over the last year, hired 15 player personnel men from the NFL. We have 5 former general managers on our staff and the rest personnel men. So we're creating our own IP and our own grading system that we are disseminating to teams that are interested in working with us, whether it's on the NFL side or whether it's on the NCAA side. So that is our B2B business, which is really, really focused on roster management, roster optimization, making the best decisions with the draft versus free agency.
So how does it work? Because, again, I know we're going to start getting into like the analytics, the data points and all that sort of stuff. How do you guys take your crew and determine the data points for everything?
There's all sorts of data out there on all these players, right? Like, you talk about traditional box score statistics. We can contextualize those to say, like, a touchdown's not just a touchdown. It matters what was the game state like. Was this on first down? Was it on second down? Third down? You can start using external data sources. We can start using tracking data and try and really say, like, okay, based on how all 22 of these players are moving on the field at the same time, what was the difficulty of this play? How much credit goes to this player? And, a lot of the times we're not telling somebody like Thomas something he doesn't know, right? Where we're saying, like, hey, player A is better than player B. But what we can say is, like, he is this much better. Like, this is the exact percentage better. This is, what that translates over into cost or into opportunity cost. So then, someone in Thomas's shoes can start saying, like, okay, when I want to plan my roster out, whether it's from an identity perspective or from a cost perspective, or you're looking at your division and trying to see how you stack up, how do you make those decisions with the most amount of context possible?
We have totally just landmined Thomas Dimitroff in this.
The chair went down. Well, see, I like my chair low, but now you look like super low. Like,
if you're watching on Zone TV, we got to get.
Sorry about that. There you go. Now you're right height.
I got my prop seat.
That was funny why he was talking to, by the way.
We have Sean being so serious, and then Thomas is sitting here and he's trying to find like a booster because the seat keeps dropping.
Yeah. He's trying to see if I'll crack during my answer. He's messing with me.
Yeah, that was a great job. And this is kind of off the cuff, so I could catch you guys off, guard a little bit. Let's just take L'Jarius Sneed. I was seeing that he wasn't even ranked in the top 10. I don't even think he was a top 100 player when the players do their little list, which was kind of fascinating. He wasn't on there. But, kind of take us through what the metrics were for him as a individual player, and then statistically what he looked like from a coach's perspective or GM perspective, and then how you bridge those two together to come up with how much better a player is, because I think he is a top 10 cornerback, but the numbers don't say it, I guess, because nobody's saying that.
Well, so let me just start, and then I'll toss it over to Sean on this. Remember, what we're doing at Sumer Sports is we come to the table with a subjective analysis with all of we have over 500 years experience within our staff.
Wow.
I mean, you see some of these names here, legits, right? Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, I would love to have John Robinson here because he's in town, but that's not something we have right now. Okay. The reality is we have some really, really smart football people that are evaluating for us subjectively. And then we fold in, of course, the very, very intelligent elements of the analytics, the objective side. So coming to the table with both line items, so to speak, if you're looking at it that way. And we create a much more, in my mind, a much more robust evaluation on a player versus just subjective. We're pulling in the really, really detailed advanced analytics, which I'll toss over to you on that.
Yeah, when you talk about someone like Sneed, one of the tricky things about trying to fix your coverage unit is, and it's the same thing with offensive line. You have a bunch of these weak link systems, right? And so you can bring in somebody like Sneed, and even if, given his age and where he's at in his career trajectory, even if he's only above average, that's what you need. But you need multiple of those guys. And so when we start talking with some of our client teams about hey, how can I turn my defense around? How can I turn my coverage unit around? I think with Brian Callahan coming into the Titans, they are probably going to take a page out of the Bengals notebook, and they're going to take multiple swings at guys who they think are good enough so that they can build a well-rounded coverage unit instead of over-investing in one player, because that just doesn't help you in the coverage unit.
Now, how much has analytics, GM Dimitroff, I guess kind of taken over, or how much influence has it in the actual meetings when you're in the scouting meetings talking about players?
It's a really big thing. Everyone in football understands the evolution of our game right now, right? You and I came up through the 80s, seeing how things were, and into the 90s. If you're not on board and you're not appropriately utilizing the data that's available, you're being left behind, right? Owners aren't wanting that anymore. They're not wanting the young guy that comes in who's just a so-called football head, right? They're looking for a guy who's really good at analyzing from a football viewpoint, but are also going to supplement appropriately. So this is an augmentation tool that all of this data is doing for people, right, in football. This is not black box in any way. When you can be out there, and we can all be negative about it, right? Those of us who have been around it a long time are like, come on, are we really going to utilize data in that way? If you utilize it appropriately and you use it as a juxtapositioning for some of the decisions, almost every decision you're making, to be able to look at the objective side to whatever you're doing, whether it's acquiring a player like a corner that we're talking about, or whether it's drafting a quarterback, being able to take that data and run it through the algorithms that our really, really intelligent people are doing allows us for another touch point where we're able to say, all right, I know this. Remember, you can go into your owner as a GM, you can go into your head coach. When you come to the table with some sound, solid data, along with being a very good football man, don't get me wrong, you can't be someone that comes in with this just as a so-called nerd. You have to have the entire element about you, but that goes a long way. You can convince a head coach, or you can convince an owner to make a move within the organization when they see the hardcore data, which I think is really, really important as we move forward.
Is that what's changing in the National Football League, where you see the front offices? How much are the decisions now the GM, or is it a collaboration with the coach, or is it a coach-dominant decision? You guys give him the reports, he then make the decision. What has changed or stayed the same there with those kind of decisions?
So normally, even if the head coach has final football say, which is that final linebacker, that final safety on the roster, because someone has to make that decision, Normally in NFL organizations, that head coach and that GM are working side by side on everything. They go to the owner. They both answer to the owner normally, right? Unless you're the Bill Belichick situation or Andy Reid, where someone answers, the GM might answer to the head coach. Normally, you're operating together. You make decisions together, and that's what I'm saying. If you can come to the table with some really convincing information, you don't need to rise up and get all fired up with your head coach. If you're a GM, you can keep it calm. Deliver the message, show them the data, and then talk through it. Most coaches are a lot more open to look at the data that's out there versus just pushing back and saying, this is just a bunch of data and so-called, and I say this lovingly to the nerds of the world, right? We hear it. Again, the guy flew a Blackhawk in the Army for 8 years. He's a adjusted nerd.
Well, coaches are stubborn too. They want to do it their way, no doubt.
No question. But I think criminally underutilized data out there. If you're being smart, and I tell all of my contemporaries in the league that are general managers, you want to parlay this into another contract, 2, 3, or 4, you show your ownership group that you come to the table with that really good football knowledge, and then you're supplementing properly with the data that's available. To me, that's a no-brainer. Then you're showing the owner, I am taking this all into consideration. For the longest time, football guys were overrunning and they were just tossing people aside. It's not that way anymore. The last thing I'll share, I'll use Arthur Blank as an example. Arthur Blank's sons, I think 28 and 32, those are the guys that are reading the third parties and all the data that's out there that we all read. They're paying attention to it. They're not going to be bringing in GMs and head coaches in the next 10 years that don't have a sound understanding of how to utilize data. Not black box.
So they're the ones that are now looking down and saying, "Can you just throw the ball to Kyle Pitts, please?"
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just double
That's
checking.
exactly right.
So is it Thomas Dimitroff as well as Sean Clement from Sumer Sports joining us in studio? They're going to stick around for just a few more minutes as we are talking about not only what they are bringing to the personnel and recruiting symposium that is taking place over at the Renaissance Hotel, but also ways that this can kind of correlate to what we've been talking about with the Titans, because there are now decisions that have to be made over the course of the next 3 weeks. We'll talk more about them as he is the hitman Blaine Bishop. I am Joe Hunk, brought to you by All Four Seasons Garage Doors here on 104.5 The Zone. A few more minutes here with former Falcons general manager Thomas Dimitroff and Sean Clement, who are both from Sumer Sports. Thomas Dimitroff now in his third chair in the room. You're really just testing these out.
Super tall guy.
I'm really not that high maintenance, but, look.
We got some malfunction chairs, man.
Thank you.
That's what happens sometimes.
You're the first person that's ever sat in this many chairs, and they continue to mess up. You started to touch that one. I'm like, please just don't move. Just don't touch
it's just
it.
like moving up the ladder there in the scouting department, right? Right. You sit in a lot of different chairs, man.
Well, make sure that the listeners don't think that all of a sudden I gained 80 pounds since I've been doing nothing. So, I'm not. I mean, I'm kind of like
pretty
just
good
sitting
shape,
there.
man.
I'm okay, but the fact is, it's not like I'm just so heavy I can't keep this chair up.
No, you're not. Well, I mean, I don't know. Can you play offensive line? We may have some openings at some point in time. We definitely did last year for the Titans.
Yeah,
So interested to see.
Yeah, but no, I'm saying I know that you love outdoors. You work out a lot. You do a lot of biking, things like that. Like, that's continuing, right? Like, you still do that?
Yeah, I love it. And I actually drove over here from Atlanta today. I drove up in my Sprinter van. I have a Storyteller Overland, jacked up. I go all over the country in it. I take my bikes with me. In the wintertime, I'm taking my snowboards with me, climbing gear, golf. My wife says, no, I'll meet you out in Seattle. No thanks. I'll just fly out there and meet you there.
Screw the road trip. So wait, are you biking? You golfing here? What are you doing?
Well, I'm trying to find a golf game. If anyone's out there with the best course in town, reach out to the guys here.
Yes.
Because tomorrow or Wednesday, I think I have a little bit of time. But that's honestly what I'm doing.
F&M Bank chat is open so that you can throw those recommendations in as we're going, as you guys are going to be over at the Renaissance Hotel.
Well, I got to start this off because I dreamed to be a GM as a player. Naturally, there's no way I could have done that. But all GMs make mistakes. What would you say? Give us 2 players off the cuff that you go, dang it, I didn't go with my gut. I should have drafted this guy, or we should have signed this guy. Give me a couple guys, offense, defensive guys, that you say, man, that one there, I regret I let slip away.
Well, look, I always look back, and there are so many that you can talk right. This is not an exact science, of course. I look back in my second year, because I went there in 2008 in Atlanta. In 2009, we draft Pere Jerry from University of Mississippi, a really good defensive tackle, great athlete, et cetera, et cetera. But we passed up Clay Matthews. I mean, think about that. Now, we passed him up. I mean, he was, and I remember he was mad. I met him after, he's like, are you kidding me, really? And this comes back, I'm going to raise my hand because I was in charge, but ultimately you talk to your coaching staff, he was not a fit. We were a 4-3 team. We weren't a 3-4 team. And yet we should have been smarter about it and said, let's just draft at this point the best defensive player we can. We'll make it work. And we didn't. That was one I for sure made I made the wrong choice. And the other one very quickly was after we traded for Julio Jones the next year in 2012, it was the worst draft I ever had in my life. We had no one left on that draft. And this happens, right? You go out there and you sell the farm, so to speak, and I would never do it differently because I love Julio Jones. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I know you guys had him here at a different time. Right? Yeah. But we the next year we come back, we don't have a first round. We draft a center, Peter Kahns from University of Wisconsin. Love the kid, but he fizzled very quickly, and that was the start to the year after drafting Julio and spending all of our money and our focus on him. That was a tough year for us in general.
Yeah. In theory, talk a little bit more about this because, we're always trying to educate our listeners about sometimes taking the best player on the board is not always the right choice if he doesn't fit the scheme and system that you're running because he will not then elevate his game and he won't grow and be the player he should be. Because I feel like I know that because I wouldn't have become the player I was in this 46 defense that I was running. I was multitasking, all kind of things, really a corner, nickel, safety, linebacker. I mean, there was a lot of different things that I did, but talk about that a little bit and how that kind of goes with the coaches and, trying to sway them on making sure we get the guy fits the scheme and not just an elite talent.
Well, look, everyone always says, a lot of people would argue that it's a need-driven system, right? Yes, of course you want to draft the best player, but you're not going to draft a quarterback or a tight end. If you have the best tight end in the history of the world playing for you at that time, you're not going to draft the best player. It has to, keep it within perspective, right, of where you are. When you're talking about having someone who fits into your system or not fitting into your system, it is complicated. Back to Matthews, right? Do you really invest in that? And all of a sudden you have an outside linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker who you're trying to find a place for. 2 years from now, that person isn't thriving. That player's not happy because he's in a system that he's playing 30% of the time. We make a mistake. So you really have to be intentional about how you make that decision. If you commit as a team, as a coaching staff, that you're going to do all you can. Look, I'm a huge fan of Dan Quinn. To take Micah Parsons, put him around, move him around, those are big things. But you have to agree to that. That's a big thing. And the other thing, Blaine, which is, as you know, is vital. If you have a coach on your staff, let's just say it's a position coach or a defensive coordinator, and you have a player that he is not for, coaches don't dictate what the personnel does and the draft by the general managers. They don't dictate. But you know that if that coach is over there by the water cooler complaining all the time about this player and you draft him in the first pick, man, you are fighting an uphill battle, or you get rid of that assistant coach, fire his butt, right? And move on, because you have to realize that the team has to be in and you have to be committed to making the best out of that player, whether he fits or kind of fits. I think it's vital that everyone is on board.
One more GM question. It seems like most GMs don't get their second go-round like coaches do. Kind of take us through why that's happened, or will that change?
As you know, there's been some great coaches out there who have gotten a second chance or third chance. We've seen some really good football coaches out there. I'm happy Dan Quinn's getting a chance up at the Commanders, right? We worked together for 6 years over in Atlanta. I have a theory on it. It doesn't mean that it's tried and true, but I do believe that coaches have a personality about them that all the other owners out there know about, whether that's a hardcore coach or whether it's a personable coach. When an owner fires a coach, right, they look to, okay, I want to look at this type of personality. Who's down the list? Oh, here's Brian Callahan. He's a great juxtaposition to Mike Vrabel. So let's bring him in. They're not saying that about the general manager. The general managers aren't known around the league as their style necessarily. They might build the team a certain way, but as far as the personnel and the leadership style, I think there's just a So there's just a limit on what these owners know about the next wave. They're going to go within their own building, Blaine, or they're going to move on somewhere else and try to find someone else. It's a rare deal that people get a second chance.
Well, and you're somebody that relies so much on analytics and trusts it so much, especially with this system. There's a lot of coaches in the NFL that are just like, hey, look, I don't want to use analytics because I know what I'm looking at when I look on film or when I see at practice. When you guys are talking about this program that you guys are going to be doing the presentation for here coming up in a few hours, how do you go to that person and say, look, this is how it can help you with the coaches that like to just use the eye test?
So I'm going to toss it over to Sean right after this. I'm not going to spend too much time. Look, I mean, the biggest thing for me to go in, and these guys, again, wildly academic and wildly versed at so many levels on building models that will help these teams, help these coaches, help the general managers make better decisions. Ours, again, is roster building. It's not, as I mentioned before, it's not about game time decision making. So by going to these people and stating, and here at the NCAA symposium here, going to the general managers now, right? Going to the general managers and saying, look, we can help you on a subjective side with your NIL, with your portal work, which is, we think, can be very helpful, appropriately, of course. We're not taking over the organization because we have 5 former general managers and think we know everything. We are going to provide where those programs, where the college programs would want us to be involved, and on the NFL side, where the NFL teams want us involved. We'll provide them, and then we'll step back, and then we'll interact with them regularly.
Yeah, the big thing from the analytics side is you're providing context, right? So you have a coach that doesn't necessarily want to use analytics, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But what we would like to be able to provide, them, whether it's personnel decisions or it's roster management decisions, like, look, this is the gap between player A and player B in a quantified way. And so when we start talking about, like, okay, how good is, Simmons as a pass rusher versus the rest of the league? Okay, well, we can specify exactly how much better or worse he is than comparative players. And then you can have a really, detailed, intelligent discussion about, like, are we getting, the right amount of performance for the right amount of money, and are we building across the team in a way that maximizes our chances at a division title, or, if you're trying to go after a conference championship on the college side? All of those types of discussions just become much more in-depth when you use analytics. To me, it's like having a second scouting department, but you're just looking at the numbers and providing context. The GM or the head coach, whatever it may be, is still the ultimate decision maker.
So with this program, whenever you're down looking at depth chart, for instance, because you're talking about player A versus player B, with here at the Titans, you have that conversation about now Elijah Molden and Quandre Diggs. Your program would be able to say this is the difference between the two types of players, or with what we are now going to be dealing with over the next 3 or 4 weeks is D-Hop is out for 3 to 5 weeks. Who could step in from an analytics standpoint and fill that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're starting to look at, okay, who do we have on the roster with D-Hop out, right? So we have Ridley in our system. Well, we know Ridley does a lot better versus man coverage versus zone coverage. So then how do we specify the rest of our offense to try and get the defense into man coverage, because the analytics has told us that's where we have the advantage? We also know that, Brian Callahan's coming out of the Bengals system. We know what they like to do with 11 personnel. We know that they have a shorter average depth of target than a lot of other teams out there. So we know we're going to be relying on the tight end a lot more, right? So now we know that Okwonkwo is going to be a bigger piece of the offense. So then how do we supplement the loss of D-Hop by getting Okwonkwo more targets, by getting Ridley into man coverage, and trying to really design our offensive philosophy around these weaknesses? And it's all informed by the type of data that we can look up.
And I was just going to say, and it's vital that your head coach and your whole coaching staff is open to that, right? If you have a closed off old school coach that's not willing to analyze the elements that are out there to help make decisions, we've said that time and again, even before we got into this spot where we all are with data as it pertains to player acquisition. When you're talking about player performance, athletic performance, right? We've been doing that for years now. Since I got in the league as a general manager in 08-09 is when we kicked off all the player tracking on the field, practice field, some, preseason games, and we watched that closely. It took a while for coaches to understand about load on the field. There are some coaches who would leave and say, don't you dare tell me how to run my team and my players as a GM. And I'd say, we have some amazing information here. Just look at it, work with it a little bit, and see what data is telling you about how Julio Jones is 80% more apt to pull a hamstring if you run him 30% more of the reps, whatever it may be. There's so much great information out there to help. If you can get over the ego with some of the football people out there, and believe me, we all have them. I get it. We all have egos. I'll raise my hand on it. You just have to be understanding that there is another side to this. And I believe this. People, third parties like us, I believe we can take the good head coach to be very good and the very good to be a Hall of Famer. I think the same thing about GMs.
Well, and you have this list of general managers and front office people. I mean, Mike Mayock obviously is one of the more famous ones because of NFL Network, because of him just being with the Raiders. But what do these guys do for you? Like, when are they going out and scouting? Are they looking at data? What do they do?
So they are virtually scouting for us right now. Nowadays, you really don't have to go out on the field. Now, let me say that. I'm an old school scout that way. I want to go out and sniff the proverbial pits is what I say, because you need to be out there. You need to watch Blaine Bishop when he's out there moving around, and you're like, okay, man, let me see this cat. I'm not just looking at the number on the piece of paper. I need to be out there and watch this guy do what he needs to do. That is a big thing. But I think all of these guys are evaluating from afar. They're interacting, they're comparing, and then we're taking all of their subjective analysis, whether that's 5, 6, or 7 games. We grade 800 players every year on the college side, and we grade 2,200 players on the pro side. So that's 3,000 plus players. Sumer Scout is our product. It's a foundational product that we provide to the NFL, and semblance of that to the NCAA is what we're working on, of course. That is big, and then we combine it back to what Sean was saying with the objective side. Think about it this way. If you have an old school coach or GM who, I know these 500 years of experience football players that Sumer Sports has. Great. I want to read what they have to say. I also want to see the line item beside it that is all analytics. What I also want to see, I want to see the combined. What I'd really love to do is see the, Tennessee Titans. There's their subjective. Right next to Sumer's subjective, right next to just the analytic, and then right next to the combined. When you start going down the line that way and you're comparing, it doesn't mean you're going to have the exact answer, Joe, but you're going to say, why are we 6.5 here with just our Tennessee Titans subjective? Sumer is a 6.8, and the full objective and subjective is a 7.5. Let's figure this out. Using our arbitrary numbers, of course.
Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
The other thing I would say is, like, when we're designing these analytics, like, because we're taking raw tracking data and it's just players moving around on the field, one of the things I think really sets us apart on the analytics side is we're building these metrics, and then we come back to this 500 years of scouting experience and say, look, this is how we're grading this particular player, this particular position in this phase of the game. Are we doing things that make sense? Let's talk from the basic foundational assumption position, like, where is the responsibility for this player on this play, so that we can build something in an automated fashion, so that now we can build metrics for college teams, because we're having to grade 12,000 players at once. You just can't do that. Wow. At an individual level. But if we can build the algorithms to harness that 500 years and build it into our analytics, now we have something that nobody else has. There are other analytics companies out there. There are other scouting companies out there. There's nobody that's marrying the two of them like Sumer is.
As we're joined right now, former Falcons general manager Thomas Dimitroff and Sean Clement here on 104.5 from Sumer Sports.
Well, Thomas or Sean, I was wondering if you guys targeted, I'm going to call them all-star games, like the Senior Bowl, East-West, to also give them data maybe 2 years ahead of time about certain players that maybe you guys already have kind of scattered, which you already are doing for NFL teams. So do you then, pitch it to the all-star games, or no, that's not part of it right now?
No, I mean, it's something that we're thinking seriously about it, right? We have so much data and availability to disseminate appropriately, and that's what we're looking at right now. Where are the next streams that we can be involved with? Whether it is, Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl, right? There's a lot of really good information there that they already have. Where could we take them to another level on it? No, Jim and I work together with the Patriots, so I do know.
Jim. Yeah.
This is such a this league, right? We're all tied in one way or another. But I will say this: you asked me this a little bit off air. I mean, when you think about a general manager in this league and making choices in this area, I look back on it 3 years ago when I was, when Dan Quinn and I first got fired in 20, and I was thinking, okay, what do I really want to do? Do I get back in? Do I become a consultant? Do I work my way back into a general manager or a presidential role? I will say categorically, the reason I'm here right now and I've not made my efforts to go back in is because I do believe in this wholeheartedly. I would never do this type of a job, or I would never promote this as I did if I didn't believe this is so cutting edge and it is so needed. And over the next 5 to 10 years in this league, if you don't jump on board, there's no way you're parlaying it to another contract, and you just won't survive in this business.
Well, Cronky on our F&M Bank chat wants to know if this can help him with fantasy football.
I'll let Sean take that.
Well, Cronky, if you go to sumersports.com, you will find a data section where you can look up things like, stats on all your favorite players, coverage units, defense, all of that to help you make your better decisions in your fantasy football league. So we're here for you, buddy.
Oh, jokingly, I asked him that question.
I'm going here now and
earlier
looking at
before it. But one more, serious question, and kind of testing my GM skills to see. The Falcons naturally signed Kirk Cousins, then they drafted Penix, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Penix.
Yeah, Penix. And I said, I thought it was a great move. A lot of people were laughing at it because I felt like now they're getting a security blanket, even though they guaranteed really the first 2 years of Cousins' deal. You don't know how, an older player will come back from an Achilles injury, and you don't know. And you're also at the same time developing a player, and you're looking at the next year's draft and say, if we're in this position next year, there's really not a guy high on the list. So you're looking forward. So what were your thoughts when you saw, being the former GM there at the Falcons, when they drafted Penix? What were your thoughts initially?
I mean, initially they were, hey, look, they've invested a lot of money in a quarterback in Kirk Cousins that they knew they were going to come in. I mean, I don't want to speak for Arthur Blank. I have a great relationship with him. I would say Arthur wants to win. And Arthur is willing. He always has been willing to give back to that community. And if it's $90 million for a year or two to get Penix to a spot where he takes it and thrives, great. However, no however negatively, but however, if all of a sudden Michael Penix is thriving and, we're waiting for Kirk Cousins to really heal totally, and this cat has 6 games under his belt and he's won 5 of them, that may be a pretty expensive backup quarterback. But again, Arthur's doing what is best, he believes, for the community and the fan base, and kudos to him that they moved through. I know Terry Fontenot, that was not an easy move to make, right? Because,
right. Oh, man, it would look serious. But
yeah. And I believe, guys, I was there when we drafted Matt Ryan. They wanted us to draft the defense, they being the fan base, because it's a polarizing move. The fan base wanted us to draft the defensive tackle from LSU. I don't know if you guys are trivia guys and know who that was. I can't even remember who it was. It was a while ago. The reality is, if we didn't take Matt Ryan back then, first of all, I would have been fired the second year. I know that. That's just how it goes. Arthur Blank is a businessman, and if you're not winning there, it's time to leave. But anyway, we made the move to stay there with a quarterback. You go as your quarterback goes. Obviously, Michael Penix, even though he's a little bit older, even though he has some injuries, he has something that they really liked. They wouldn't have made that move if they didn't see something special there.
Yeah. Tough call when you sign a quarterback, though, and then you want your first rounder to play immediately in this day and age, and then he's not initially really not playing, hopefully, after signing Kirk Cousins.
Well, there's a no-trade clause there as well, gentlemen, right? Which that's going to be interesting. He can override that, as I understand. So,
before we let you go, one thing, it was Glenn Dorsey, was the defensive tackle from LSU. I just looked it up.
I was going to say Spears.
It was Glenn Dorsey. And 2, I'm a huge baseball analytics guy. And in fact, somebody just texted me going, who's that in the studio with you right now? I was like, well, look, if I'm making a baseball comparison, this is Billy Beane, this is Jonah Hill. Those are the 2 that I'm saying. But with the baseball side, there's a war. We talk about war all the time. Is there an answer to that with football? What is the war of football?
The war of football is war. So,
dude, that's not the answer. What's the analytic?
Can use the answer.
No, so what we have on the NFL side is a wins above replacement metric. It goes into all of the stuff that we use on the B2B side here at Sumer. When we are consulting with our clients, whether they're NCAA or they're in the NFL, the backbone of our analytics is wins above replacement. Now, we could get into a whole nother show on what does replacement mean? How do we measure it? All these things. But the hardest part of doing football analytics is dividing the credit among the 22 different players on the field at a time. And I think what really sets us apart is when we start defining all these pieces that go into our analytics, that we're tapping into this 500 years of experience to make sure that we are actually measuring what a player was supposed to do, what they did, and did that, is that outcome skill? Is that outcome luck? How stable is it year over year? We're looking at all that kind of stuff. It's really fun work.
Well, we deeply appreciate it. We know you got to get out of here. The show for us is only wrapping up in a few minutes as well. So thank you guys absolutely so much for coming in. And this program that you guys have is beautiful. I mean, absolutely. And I did not know there was a website portion of this that has answers to it, because now I'm on that, and I've got a fantasy football draft coming up this weekend. So we're good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, We've got a great article on there on explaining the kickoff rule, too. I know that's on everybody's mind. So head to sumersports.com. We got articles for you, data for you, whatever you need.
You can even play with that on some of your gaming needs. So I'll just just leave it at
No,
that.
we need you to do this with EA to fix the college football game. How about we do this because they've got it all screwed up. So thank you. Yes, please. Okay, now thank you. All right, we'll be right back as we wrap up the show. Thomas Dimitroff, thank you so much. Sean Clement, thank you, and thank you for your service as well as a West Point guy. Thank you guys so much as we continue here on 104.5 The Zone.